All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. A few housekeeping things just before we get started. If you are on Twitter and want to follow along on there, we will be live tweeting this webinar. Our handle is at BigRoad Inc., and you can follow us using the hashtag HOS series. This is our third and final webinar in the HOS series. So today, Debbie and I are going to be taking you through hours of service, a bit of a general overview, and then digging into some of the more specific things, particularly when we get to the end, electronic logging devices, ELDs, which are the hot topic. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, but we will wait to be answering them until the question period we have at the end. And we do have a lot of questions already from before the webinar, and I'm sure we'll get a lot during the webinar, so we won't be able to get to all of them, but we will be posting a blog post that includes the answers to the questions and a video recording if you want to watch the webinar again later. So without further ado, I'll Debbie, who is one of our customer support representatives here at BigRoad, and she's going to walk you through some of the basics of hours of service.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, Matt. All right, so we're going to basically just kind of go through the hours of service basics, first of all. Just so you know, there's just an overview of the basic hours of service, and then we're going to go later on through more of the specifics in terms of state by state, interstate, and essentially things that are required there. So the basic cycle limits that most drivers use are either the 60-hour on-duty limit with the 7-day cycle or the 70-hour 8-day. Generally, if you're using 60 hours, 7-day, you're basically going to be running 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I mean, of course, it's kind of a rolling week. It doesn't actually mean it's Monday to Friday strictly, but you're usually running 5 days a week, while if you're on the 70-hour 8-day, you're generally running every day of the week.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out, too, that these rules that we're looking at right now are the standard rules for your average American interstate property carrying driver. We've already had a note come up about motor coach being different with a 15-hour on-duty time. That's true. We're trying to keep it to the specific here, but that is true. Motor coach does have a 15-hour on-time or 15-hour on-duty time frame, and it's not a window like property carrying is.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we do have it. What are the average interstate property carrying driver needs to follow? So it is stated here that it's for property carrying. We do have a previous blog post that does go over property and passenger carrying. So in terms of the basic shift limits here, of course, it's your 14-hour on-duty window, and then you have 10 hours of drive time within that 14-hour window. And then, of course, you have to do your 30-minute break after 8 hours of driving. In terms of your resets and resetting your cycles and resetting your shifts, in terms of resetting your shift, you have to remain off duty for a total time of 10 hours. And of course, there are specifics in terms if you're going to do split sleeper. And then also, if you are going to be resetting your cycle, there is a 34-hour reset that must be completed. You can complete a reset as often as you like, and these resets basically reset your cycle fully back to either your 70 or 60-hour period. Yeah, and then I think that's basically it. Did you have anything else about the...
Actually, I do want to point out that, as has just been pointed out to me, I actually made a typo there in the shift limit window. People have been pointing out it's 11 hours of drive time, and you are correct. That is my mistake. So thank you, everyone, for pointing that out. That is correct.
At least we know people are listening, so that's good. We know people are paying attention, so awesome. And when I was reading that, I'm like, that sounds weird, but okay, yeah, sorry, it's 11 hours of drive time. Our apology for that. But yeah, those are the basics for property carrying drivers.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, too, especially with the cycle reset, this is sort of where the difficulties of understanding hours of service rules come into play, because of things like the previous 34-hour reset changes that happened about a year ago and have been sort of on the fence about, they've been suspended about how often drivers can take them and what time frame they have to occur in. So these are really the reason why we want to talk about hours of service is because of how difficult they can be to understand.
Yeah, and in fact, I also have been hearing that there has been actually a mistake made somewhere in terms of technically the 34-hour reset is not even required right now apparently, but I don't want to open a can of worms really with that. I mean, I kind of already have, but in terms of the 34-hour reset, it is definitely still a good idea to do that. As of right now, to my understanding, officers are still going to be saying, yes, if you want to reset your cycle, you can do that. Or, of course, you can also run under your recap, and basically whatever falls off on the 8th day is what is available to you. So you can either reset your cycle or run under just recap, depending on what works for you. All right, so this is where we're kind of going to go through the specifics in terms of jurisdiction variations, short haul exemptions, and then basically 30-minute break exemptions. So basically, depending on what state you're in, you may have to fall under different hours of service regulations, and this is because many states have their own interstate regulations that are going to be applicable to drivers who only are driving within that state. For instance, in the app, we currently have the Texas 70-hour 7-day. We have the Alaska 70-hour 7-day and the Alaska 80-hour 8-day. And we also have the California 80-hour 8-day and California 112-hour 8-day. So we do have those exemptions, and we also have the Canadian hours of service rules as well once you get into Canada. When you get into Canada, you are required to keep 14 days of logs, and that's a difference in terms of where in the U.S. you're only required to have the last 7 days. I will kind of go over this quickly because I know in the last webinar we went over this, but whatever country you're in, you basically have to run under those rules, and your past 7 or 14 days need to be in compliance with whatever country you're in. So it's important that you kind of prepare for that ahead of time. And the other thing about the Canadian rules, if you are using those rules, we don't support any of the deferrals or Canadian split sleeper right now. So if you are using that and you notice the deferrals are not working, we don't support them, and we don't support those deferrals as well in regards to split sleeper. In terms of short haul exemptions, if you are within a 100 air mile radius, you are not required to keep logs, but you do want to still run under your hours of service rules correctly. So making sure that you have to return to your home base within 12 hours. So you want to make sure that if you are a short haul driver, you still return to your home base within 12 hours, but you don't actually have to record your hours of service. If the next day you are going to be traveling, past your 100 air mile radius, then you will want to actually make sure you have logs for those days and prepare for that so that you are running under the correct hours of service rules then. So that's definitely an important thing to keep in mind. And then in terms of your 30-minute break exemptions, the app supports 30-minute breaks. You can select that option where you don't have to take your 30-minute break, but you want to definitely make sure you select this only if this is a requirement for the hours of service rules you selected. For example, livestock drivers are not required to take a 30-minute break. So that's an example of when you would want to select that. And you, of course, will want to look into examples of when that is required.
Right. Now, I know we said we'd answer questions towards the end of the webinar, but I did just want to point out one question that has come in about the 30-minute break exemption in particular, and the question is whether that's eating out of the drive time that a driver has. And no, it isn't. So the driver does have the 11 hours to actually be driving. Where the 30-minute break is kind of eating out of is the on-duty time, even though it's technically put down as off-duty time, because in property carrying you have a 14-hour window. It's not a set hour of 14 hours on duty that you can take off-duty time, and you have from the time you start your shift till the very end, you have 14 hours of on-duty time in which you can do your driving. So that 30-minute break is going to be eating out of that on-duty time, even though it's technically not on-duty hours. it does eat out of that window, but it doesn't eat out of the drive time.
Yes, and in terms of any off-duty periods within your shift, and I'm going to kind of go over this a little bit later, off-duty does eat out of your shift regardless. So any off-duty period, if you're off-duty for 2 hours, you've used 2 hours of your shift. So I'm going to go over that a little bit later because it kind of it's going to be brought up in terms of differences between paper logs and using electronic logs. And then also in terms of 30-minute break exemptions, also it's important to select this option only if this is part of the exemption you're using. I have seen logs where drivers select this and they're not under any kind of 30-minute break exemption for whatever reason it may be. You don't want to do that. If you are selecting that option and you get stopped by an officer and they see that you've selected that option, they're going to question you in terms of, well, why have you selected this? What rule set are you under for you to have this exemption? So definitely make sure that you're selecting the correct exemptions or variations within your hours of service rules.
And Deb, I'd say that it's important to make sure you're selecting the right rules no matter what you're doing. For instance, we talk about the jurisdiction variations. If you are doing intrastate in one of those states that do have slightly different rules than the federal rules, and then you're going on to do an interstate run later, you have to make sure that you're in compliance with it, whatever you're currently driving as. If you were driving for longer hours under an intrastate rule, that could affect your available hours during your interstate run,
yes,
and whether or not you're in compliance. So it's always important to make sure that you're in compliance with how what rules you're driving under on that current day.
Exactly. All right, so I'm kind of just going to go over what is required in regards to Regulation 395.8 in regards to your driver's daily log. And this is basically how BigRoad is set up. It's a little hard to see on the screen, but basically if you were to sign into your account online and downloaded a PDF or printed off your log, this is what it would look like. So basically what is required, and this is basically a 24-hour clock, midnight to midnight. We don't run noon to noon. We do only run midnight to midnight logs as of right now. It's going to basically show your time zone, the date that you're currently running, the hours of service you've selected, whether you're in the US or in Canada, your name, if you have a co-driver, your co-driver's name, the truck number and the truck license. If you're using a trailer, you need to put the trailer number there. You're going to also need to make sure you select your starting and ending odometer mileage because that's, of course, required. One thing is in the app, sometimes it will not require you to fill in a starting or ending odometer mileage. Even if it doesn't show a warning for that, it's really important to still fill that in because if you may never know in the future if you're trying to pull reports or anything like that, it could really cause a lot of issues. So it's important to fill in your starting and ending odometer mileage regardless. The on-duty recap is not essentially required to be on a driver log, but you do have the option to select this in the app, and I think it's a good idea to select this anyways because it just shows you what is your availability based on recap. And of course, the graph which shows your off-duty, sleeper, driving, and on-duty time and the total time used within the 24-hour period. If you have any documents, there's a section to select what kind of documents you have. If there are any remarks, so if you've gone on a cycle restart, the option for the app will automatically fill that in for you and put what period of time you had your cycle reset. And then, of course, the log events that coincide with your the graph. So basically, your period of when you started, each status, what location, and the duration of time for that. And of course, it's going to also include your carrier address and the carrier name, where your home terminal is, and sometimes your home terminal will be different from your carrier address. And in terms of also your time zone, your time zone is based on your home terminal. So if your carrier is in a different state from your home terminal, you do want to make sure your time zone is based on just your home terminal location, and it should never change no matter what time zone you're going through. And then, of course, the spot for your signature. So that's that's the basics in terms of what's required on a driver log. In terms of other differences here, or not differences, are things that BigRoad provides or shows you on your logs is if you do have a violation, the log sheet, the printed log sheet, the emailed log sheet, or the fax log sheet is not going to show those violations for you. They're not going to blatantly show that you have a violation here. They're basically for you to know where your violations are and for you to fix them before they're presented. And also, if you do complete a DVIR, a pre-trip or post-trip, it is also going to show up on this log sheet. It's not on this example here, but it would show up below whether or not you've completed one, which for most drivers, it's not required to fill in a DVIR unless you find basically an error or an issue with your truck. So if you do find an issue with your truck, you can check that off, state what it is, whether or not you can fix it or not, and then basically that would be listed under the driver daily as required. All right, so in terms of your options today, so these are the options that drivers have in terms of paper logs, electronic logbooks, or ELDs, or AOBRD. Now, in terms of paper logs, I believe a lot of drivers are used to paper logs. I mean, if you've been a veteran in the trucking industry, you have definitely been using paper logs, and you're probably most comfortable using paper logs. And there are pros to that. It's easy to edit, and you're very familiar with using paper logs. But there are some cons to that. It can be really messy, depending on how you like your writing. If you're not a really neat writer, your logs are going to appear pretty messy. You're also prone to making errors and violations. And this is where I was talking about earlier, where if you are used to doing something on your log this certain way in terms of, for instance, off-duty time, your off-duty time within your shift counts towards your shift. So if you are used to thinking that it doesn't count towards your shift, and I have a lot of drivers who say, oh, no, it doesn't, and no, it does. Any period within your shift basically counts towards your 14-hour on-duty window. So if you are used to doing that on paper, when you switch to an electronic logbook, it's going to be a little bit of a hard habit to break because you're so used to doing that. And that's the thing about paper. If you are used to doing something and it's been wrong for so many years, the only way to correct yourself is making sure you understand those rules. And in terms of going over to electronic logbooks, the good thing about that is that it will show you where those errors are. And then another con is in terms of paper logs is that it can be time consuming. The pros for electronic logbooks, of course, is that your logs are going to be super neat and clean, as you can see in the example, and as you know, if you've been using BigRoad, you're going to see where your violations are. It will tell you where they are, where to fix them, as you can see again on the example, what kind of violations you have and what needs to get fixed. This will save you a lot of time because the app is basically doing most of the work for you. You basically just need to make the edits and changes, which is also part of a pro. It's that it is great that you can easily edit your logs. The one con is that you may want to get a printer. If you are using the BigRoad app on its own, I would say we highly recommend getting a printer because depending on what state you go through, especially Missouri will require you to provide them with a paper log or a printed log. And again, it's not that you have to. It's not that it's a legal requirement that you have to provide paper logs, but if an officer requests for a paper log, then you need to provide them with the paper log. So it's however the officer wants to view your log. So, and Missouri is a for sure, but I mean there are many different states where, I mean, New York, for instance, I've been getting questions about where, oh, well, I've been to New York so many times and no one has ever has asked me for a paper log, and now someone has. It really all depends on the officer. So it's better to be safe than sorry. We definitely recommend you getting a printer. Now, in terms of ELDs or AOBRDs, you're going to definitely, again, get neat logs. You're going to know where your violations are. You're going to save a lot of time, and you're not required to have a printer. So that's really great. The only difference now is that you have limited editing. So when you are using an ELD or an AOBRD, you are not able to edit your drive time. So that is the one thing that you'd have to remember, is that if you can't edit your drive time, it's basically kind of, again, getting out of different habits you may have been using when you're using paper logs or just the app on its own. So that's the thing. It's just limited editing done on ELD or AOBRDs. Did you have anything to add to that, Matt?
Sounds good. I'm going to be moving into talking about ELDs now.
Absolutely.
So obviously the big thing in the last recent months has been the publishing of the ELD mandate. This was published in December. And really what this mandate does is, well, it's basically what it sounds like. It's mandating the use of ELDs for all drivers who don't meet a certain exemption. There's a few of those I'll talk about in a moment. But basically it's making sure that these are mandated for all drivers by December of 2017. Now, one of the ways out of that is to have an AOBRD, which Debbie was mentioning earlier. And if you have an AOBRD, that will give you until December 2019. Now, there's always some confusion about the acronyms that are associated: ELD, AOBRD, ELOG, all these sort of short forms. So what you need to know is that the ELD is sort of the new standard. No one knew what it was before the mandate was published in December. And even still, all the ELD companies, us included, are working through the process of creating a device that's going to be compliant with the freshly published rules. AOBRD is what you could consider the current standard, or I guess the previous standard of electronic engine-connected logs. And then electronic logbooks, which is what the BigRoad app is, are non-engine connected logs that are done digitally. Right. So one big thing for ELDs is that drive time is now going to be recorded directly from the engine via the diagnostic port. So that means that drivers aren't going to be able to put it in when they were driving themselves. That's all going to be recorded automatically. So that's really the big difference here, in that there's not that driver input on their logs and what they were doing. So what does this mean for the effects on hours of service? Really, there's not much going to change in terms of the rules that drivers are following. 8 hours of service rules themselves don't change. The big thing is, again, how logs are created. So this means that drivers are going to have to get used to using a device rather than just paper to create their logs. Now, in a lot of ways, this simplifies things for drivers, because they don't have to worry about having their logbook nice and neat. Everything's done for them. The big thing that people are mostly worried about is, let's call it flexibility. Well, in reality, it's cheating on logs, and it's a big issue, because you always hear all the time, well, everyone does it. Which may be true. Drivers are going to not have that flexibility to add 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there to their drive time. So there's that issue of, are they going to get more violations? Well, if they don't start following how the laws are laid out, then yes, they probably are. But it's important to remember that everyone's in this same boat. All the drivers are going to have to do it, provided they don't fit one of the exemptions, such as having a pre-2000 motor vehicle, or short haul, or drive-away, tow-away. So everyone's in the same boat, and this is really a big reason why you're seeing these new things such as the anti-coercion regulations come into play, because regulators also do want to make sure that drivers aren't being pressured to go over their logs, especially now when they're definitely going to get caught for it. So looking at what the next steps you should be looking at when you're planning to move to an ELD are, well, first thing you should be doing is researching and looking into what's right for your business, and that's really part of what you're doing just now watching this webinar. You want to see what options are going to work for you. There's different things that are going to, depending on your size and your needs, are going to dictate what you want to do for your business. The next big thing we recommend is making sure you have a transition plan. just knowing how you're going to switch, the timeline that you're planning to. We recommend doing this as soon as possible because even though 2017 sounds a long time away, in terms of implementing this with a fleet, it's going to take a while, and you want to make sure that before it's mandatory that your drivers have a sense of how they're going to do it. Make sure that they're doing this properly so that when the time comes, they're not mixing things up and getting violations. And then executing on that plan. What we recommend is picking the drivers that you think are going to be most accepting of the changes and working with them so that you see what difficulties they have in transitioning, and you can take that and then implement that with the rest of your drivers to make sure that everyone's working as smoothly as possible. So we think BigRoad's a great choice for this. Drivers love the app, and DashLink, which is our engine connected device, is a great stepping stone after that. So if you are already using BigRoad, give us a call, and we'll be happy to get you started with DashLink so you can start your transition and be ready for ELDs when you need to make the move. If you already are using DashLink with us, then you actually get 2 additional years using the DashLink as an AOBRD. Now, there's some advantages to having that. The rules are a bit less stringent with an AOBRD as opposed to an ELD. So there's some benefits of getting on board quickly before the ELD mandate is enforced and having that additional 2 years of AOBRD use. And if you're completely new to electronic logs, we do have a trial that you can start. You can see the URL to that at the bottom of the page. So what you can really do is the app is free for drivers, so you can encourage your drivers to download the app and get started getting comfortable with a digital log, because they're going to have to be doing it in under 2 years. So getting started quick and early is really the best way to make sure that you're compliant when the time comes. If you want to get in contact with us, you can see the email address there or our phone number, so please feel free to call us. So we're going to be moving on to field some questions now. So our first question is, I pull campers with a pickup. Will I need to use ELDs?
All right, so if you are pulling these for personal use, then you aren't going to need an ELD. If you are using these for basically the purpose of commerce, then it depends on if you're exceeding the 26,000 pound limit or not. You want to go through those?
So one question here is, when are logs required to be completed? Well, really logs, unless you're falling under one of those exemptions, such as the short haul exemption, which is for most places under a 100 air mile radius and 150 air mile radius in Texas, you're probably going to have to be completing logs if you're driving a commercial vehicle. You're going to have to make sure that, depending what jurisdiction you are following up to see what rules it is that you fall under. For the most part, those rules we stated at the start are going to affect most of the interstate drivers. We have a blend of short-haul drivers and long-haul drivers. What should we do?
Your long-haul drivers are going to be required to keep logs, of course, and ELDs in the future when that's required. Your short-haul drivers aren't required to keep logs, but they do have to follow the rules that are required for short-haul drivers. So again, the 12-hour duty limit, and basically making sure they come back to their base within that 12 hours.
So we've had a lot of questions about using rental trucks and how that's going to be affected, especially once the ELD mandate goes through. One thing is there's no exemption for rental trucks in the ELD mandate. So we're not quite sure how this is going to be handled. I'm sure a lot of the rental companies are going to want to have their own ELD implemented so that when people are renting it, they don't have to worry about bringing their own device. It's just there for them. We do think BigRoad's a great choice for this too, because it's so easily interchanged between trucks. It's plug and play. You pull it out of the ECM within the truck and you plug it into a different truck and continue to use it. We think it's a great option for situations like these as well. one question here is, we're a driveway tow-away company. We do not own the trucks we move. We are aware that we are exempt from the new ELD rule. However, I would like to hear how our drivers can explain to the enforcement officer that they're exempt once these new things happen.
All right, awesome. So your drivers will still basically have to maintain paper logs, and we expect you will need to provide all the supporting documents that show your current shipment is a driveway or towaway operation. So making sure that you're prepared for that, preparing yourself with the required documents. And just know that if you are a driveway or towaway operator, that towaway operation that also does not regular shipping will not be exempt for the regular shipments.
So one question we've had here, and we touched on it earlier, was, will Missouri ever stop not accepting electronic logbooks without a printout? The ELD mandate actually really sort of takes care of this, because with an engine-connected log, you aren't required to have a paper, the ability to print it out. Ideally, in the meantime, we would love to see Missouri drop this restriction. I don't think that will happen.
Okay.
So, like Debbie said earlier, we do recommend, if you're just running the app alone without an engine connection, having that printer ready just in case someone really wants to see that printed log. We have noticed a huge drop-off in the amount of officers requiring that, but you do come across them from time to time.
Yeah.
There's a big concern about doing personal conveyance and off-duty driving in a vehicle when you have an ELD attached. Deb, could you tell everyone how BigRoad sort of
goes over that? Mm-hmm. So the rules on personal conveyance doesn't change with the ELD mandate, and basically to help with that, BigRoad offers an option to select personal conveyance. So basically, if you are an administrator on your account, so even if you're just a single driver, you're a driver in the app, but if you were to sign in online, you have to basically select you would have to turn on personal conveyance as an option for you, so that you will see the option to select personal conveyance in the app. So it has to be done online from BigRoad, from the online portion of the account. So bigroad.com, sign in. From the Fleets tab, you're going to be able to edit and select personal conveyance, and once you select that and save it, you'll see personal conveyance as an option for you in the app. And in the previous webinar, we kind of went over when you should be selecting personal conveyance. This is an option that you should be only selecting once you are released of your working duties. So you should not be selecting personal conveyance for any other reason other than you're no longer working, you're on your personal time, you're using the truck, it's your own truck, or using the truck to drive on your personal time.
Right, and a lot of the issues with this comes up in the fact that personal conveyance is really vague in the law. There's no set definition of a distance you can travel, so it can be a lot of issues come up with that. I think using common sense is really important. If you're going a couple 100 miles, the inspector's not going to buy that as personal conveyance. Another concern about how ELDs are sort of going to affect just the average performance of a truck. If a driver is stopped for the night and needs to keep the truck on because they don't have an onboard generator, how is this going to affect hours of service tracked with the electronic logging device? Mm-hmm. These devices are really smart, so they can tell the difference between having the engine running in a stationary spot and not actually driving versus when the vehicle is driving. Now, keep in mind that the thing that's not selectable with an ELD is the drive time. So the drivers are still able to select when they're on duty, when they're asleep, or when they're off duty. So they do still have control over that. The logs aren't completely taken out of their hands. So if they start moving the truck, then likely it's going to record that they are then driving. But if they're just staying stationary and they're in the sleeper, that won't be affected by it. Next question is, if BigRoad, if drivers are using BigRoad and they're not part of the fleet system, do the drivers have to submit the logbooks?
So drivers who aren't part of your fleet can use the email feature within the app to simply submit their logs. Though we recommend creating a fleet, it will make your life so much easier, and you'll be able to see so many additional features that we provide. Basically, access to your driver's logs whenever you need to. They don't have to send them to you. You don't have to wait for them to send it. You can always see them whenever you want. You can see where they're located on the map. You can see where they've been, their trip sheet. It's definitely recommended to do that. But of course, a driver can just send their logs to you by email if that's what you want to do for now. I would say try a 30-day trial if you're on the fence about it. Definitely try a 30-day trial of the fleet side of BigRoad so that you can see what kind of options you have and the benefits that BigRoad provides.
So there's been a lot of questions coming out about owner-operators in particular with ELDs. There's no exemption based on fleet size, so that includes single driver owner-operators. So they will need to have an ELD. And this can become difficult if you are a company where you are having company drivers as well as having a group of owner-operators that work for you as well. You're really going to, even though in the end it kind of falls on the owner-operator to make sure they're operating under compliance, you should really be concerned about the people who are driving for you following compliance, because if they are getting put out of service, that also comes back on you. So it's important to keep in mind.
And I was going to also add another thing that's kind of good about BigRoad is that if you are an owner-operator, BigRoad is really flexible. It can be taken out of, as long as, I mean, of course, it's the same type of pin type, but BigRoad can be taken out of one truck into another truck very easily. While I know some other ELD solutions are kind of more permanent within that one truck. So if you are going to be using DashLink with BigRoad, that's another pro, is that it can be really flexible and easy to take from one truck to another truck, as long as it's the same pin type.
We've had a question here about it was on our mention of the drive-away/tow-away exemption earlier, and the question says an exemption to hours of service. Actually, what we meant was that the drive-away tow-away companies are going to be exempt from the ELD mandate, meaning that they won't have to use an ELD in their vehicles. And the big reason for that, because obviously they're only seeing the truck once, they're driving it and then leaving it where they are. So the big concern was that they didn't want to have to pay to install an ELD in a truck. With BigRoad, you wouldn't run into that situation anyway, since ELDs can be moved easily among the trucks. But yeah, I do want to clarify that it's not an exemption to hours of service. It's just an exemption to using the ELDs. So they will have to complete paper logs.
Yes.
Next big question is on the logs in BigRoad specifically, and can you change a log after you've signed it, and also can you delete logs?
Yeah, so I'll kind of just discuss in terms of if you're using the app on its own and if you're using it with DashLink. With the app on its own, you can, within 14 days, you can make edits to your log to anything. And then if you want to delete a log, you can't delete a log as a whole. You would have to delete every entry, so all of your log events, you'd have to delete each log event and delete anything else that's under that day. So you can delete a log, but it would take a little bit more time because you have to delete each event. But if you sign it, you can unsign the log and make an edit and change to it within 14 days if you're using the app on its own. So that's easy peasy. If you're using it with DashLink, there are some changes. You wouldn't be able to essentially delete a log, especially if there's drive time. That's uneditable by the driver. So if you've driven that day, there's no editing the drive time, and you can't delete that log essentially after that point. If you sign your log, then you can unsign the log as a driver and make an edit. And with BigRoad, it's within 24 hours, I believe, unless we've made changes. But within 24 hours, the driver would be able to unsign the log and make edits as long as the administrator on the account has not made an edit to that day. If an administrator has made an edit to that day and you are not done your shift, unfortunately, you are no longer able to create your log under that day as a driver. It is not considered an ELD log anymore because it has been manually changed online. So it's best to then now go to a paper log to complete that day. So those are the main differences.
So one question we have is in regards to short haul and the upcoming ELD mandate, particularly people who drive short haul, but then do occasionally go on extended trips, long haul trips. So the FMCSA has built in a bit of an exemption here. If you are doing what's called an occasional long haul trip, so in their terms, it's any 8 days out of a rolling 30-day period. So it's not month by month. It's in the last 30 days if you've driven 8 days as long haul. As long as you're not going over those 8 days, you are able to keep using paper logs for those days that you are out on the road. If you're getting close to that 8-day and you're not quite sure, if you're not very planned out, we would recommend that you make sure that you're always going to be below 8 days or go with an ELD, because if you are, say, out for 9 days in a given month, you don't fall under that. So next question's on how BigRoad with our engine connection dash link actually connects to the vehicle. Question being whether it's hardwired, how it gets in. So BigRoad's dash link actually connects through the ECM port in the vehicle. So it connects right into the diagnostic port where you'd connect a lot of things. We have a pass-through connection, so if you are connecting any other device that captures other data, you will still be able to use that. The plus of this means that our devices are really mobile. They're not hardwired in. You don't have to have a professional install them. So they're very simply put in. You can move them between trucks. We do have several different types of connectors for different ports, whether you have a 9-pin, 6-pin, or an OBD. We do have connections for that. Deb, maybe you could talk a bit to the cost of BigRoad and the cost of DashLink and the cost of BigRoad on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. So the basics are the app itself, the app itself is free. If you want to use the web app portion, so if you're an administrator or even if you're a single driver and you want those additional features, it's $15 per user per month. So $15 whether you're a driver, an administrator, or a dispatcher. Every user on the account is $15. If you're using DashLink, then it is $10 per DashLink. So I guess you could say $10 per truck or driver that is required to use DashLink. So a driver basically would be $25 a month, while an administrator or dispatcher who is not on the road or doesn't drive would be $15 a month. So that's the basics in terms of pricing. In terms of any kind of further details regarding the pricing, you will want to contact sales, and I believe the email is sales@bigroad.com. They can go over that in further detail with you.
Another question we had, and it's just asking to go over the difference in terms of printing for the difference between ELD and AOBRD. Actually, with either of those systems, you're not going to be required to have a printer in the cab. So printers are only required when you have a digital log form that isn't connected to the engine. And that's how the rules are written. You have to be able to provide a printed version of the log to the officer if they ask for it. So that's why a lot of the time drivers are finding they don't need to have the printer, but we do recommend that they always have it. So if you move to an ELD system or an AOBRD system, you don't have to worry about printers anymore. That's one of the big advantages to them over just your standard electronic logbook. Okay, so we haven't gotten to all the questions yet, but we are going to be finishing up now. Again, we will be going through all of the questions we received and creating a blog post to sort of go over the answers in greater detail. And you will receive an email in the next few days to go over that. So we thank everyone for being a part of this today, and we hope you'll join BigRoad again in the future. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care, guys.